Our next presenter was to be Ignacio Lopez Miguel, and
He just came in the room.
did he? Okay.
Yes, and I think I was late letting him in, so
Okay,
we'll let him get settled if that's okay.
no problem. Yeah, I don't see him on my screen.
Oh no, it's a different. Sorry. Sorry, that was a different person. So we may have to move on to the next presenter then.
Okay. And I see that our next presenter is here, and we'll give hopefully Ignacio will make it, and we'll finish up the session with him then. So we'll move on to Michael Dale, who is from the Eindhoven University of Technology in the Netherlands. He is going to speak to us on robots, Rrasse, and the evolution of reciprocity. So Michael, with that, if you're ready, I will turn it over to you.
Hi, sorry, I just sort of like came back from a break. Did something happen? Did we skip the third speaker? Or?
I'm sorry, we did. The third speaker isn't present. So
okay.
Are you ready? Is that okay?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you for being flexible.
Yeah, no worries. Sorry, I stepped up for a second. Glad I came back. All right, so screen, and I have a handout. So yeah, just so y'all know, I decided with this presentation it'd be better to use a handout than a PowerPoint, because it's sort of like build an argument, and I think it's helpful to sort of be able to go back and look at the premises as opposed to like, going through slides. So I hope that works okay for people. And let's see, there we go. Okay.
And Michael, is that handout available online? Because we could send a link out to everyone so they could follow along in their own time too.
Yeah, it's not available online, but I can email it to people. I can make it available online.
Okay. Well, if you email it to me, I can send it out to everyone in the room.
Okay, you want me to do that now? That'll take
or you know what, that's fine. That may just disrupt things.
Yeah, like I'll just do the presentation because I think people can see it. And then yeah, afterwards I can email it to you.
That's probably a much better idea. Pardon me.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks for coming, y'all. Yeah, interesting presentation so far. So okay, so I'm going to talk about social robots. Wait, so make sure 20 minutes. Okay. All right, so some people might be aware there is an increasing interest in social robots. They're playing a bigger part in our lives. They're in elderly care centers. They're playing bigger roles in hospitals. So there's more research coming out about them, and a lot of some researchers are interested. Like, okay, there's these new objects, these new robots that are coming into people's lives. So how do we get people to sort of socially accept them more? So how do we get people to respond to them positively and accept them socially? This has kind of been a focus of some research in social robotics. And as you can imagine, when researchers are trying to gain insights about human-robot interaction, they often turn to human-human interaction because that makes sense, right? So if you want to figure out how people respond positively to a robot, try to figure out how they respond positively to other humans and what are the sort of social aspects going on there. And one of the key sort of social dynamics in human-human relations, as I'm sure all of us know, is reciprocity. So reciprocity has long been understood as a cornerstone for human social interaction. And here's a couple of definitions here. These are from the literature of reciprocity. So we should try to repay in kind what another person provided us, or if you do something for me, I'll do something for you, right? And it's also important to just realize that reciprocity is for positive and negative, right? So you help someone, they help you, but also if someone harms you or someone betrays you, you sort of reciprocate by, maybe asking for, not maybe harming them back or asking for an apology or somehow acknowledging the harm has been done. Okay, so we have an understanding of reciprocity. So the question is, should it be encoded in social robots? should social robots be capable of reciprocity? So there's a debate here. Some say yes. They say, you know, if it's important for human sociality, it will encourage the acceptance of social robots. It will encourage people to respond more positively to social robots. And importantly, there's some data to support this. There's very few studies. There's like 3 or 4 studies. And some of them are kind of old. One of them is, you know, participants interacting with a computer and the computer sort of being reciprocal with them. And it does encourage people to, you know, work longer, respond more positively to the computer. And then there's a couple more up-to-date ones, but there is some data to support this. Okay. However, some say no. So Amy van Weinsberg, she's a prominent scholar in social robotics literature. She argues that encoding reciprocity in social robots will actually lead to a deceptive relationship. So if you're a little bit familiar with the social robotics literature, deception, you know, and AI in general, right? Deception is an important thing to consider. Are these robots deceiving us? Is this bad? And so Amy van Weinsberg wants to say, in this case, yes, there's deception going on. And she goes about arguing for this in the following way. She uses care ethics specifically. And so, you know, I won't get into the whole philosophy behind care ethics, but the idea here is that good care is reciprocal insofar as it is built off of individuals responding to each other's needs and interests. And this kind of care, this kind of reciprocal care is valuable in and of itself. It has inherent value. You know, especially there's a lot of talk about, you know, caregivers and care receivers, you know, in hospitals and health settings. This is a very, you know, this is a valuable relationship, and it has value in and of itself. And, you know, it has positive impacts, right? It can restore power to vulnerable cohorts. And Amy actually has a nice discussion of this in her paper. However, if this is true, then it's problematic for social robots to use reciprocity as an instrumental value here. If you encode reciprocity in social robots, they're using something that's inherently valuable for instrumental value. So here's this line here at the end. This hopefully makes it clear, right? So humans are being deceived because something that is inherently valuable for them, reciprocity and a reciprocal care relationship, is being used to trick them into socially accepting the robot, right? Because the robot, you know, it's been sort of encoded to do this, to respond reciprocally, right? So there's not sort of a real care relationship here. So there's deception, and this is problematic. So that's Van Weinsberg's account, you know, kind of brief. Hopefully it makes sense. And so here's my thesis, these next 3 bullet points. So basically, I'm introducing evolutionary theory into the conversation. I mean, it really hasn't been discussed at all in this literature, but I think it's important, right? So because the original function of reciprocity is out of evolutionary biology and evolutionary theory, right? So reciprocity evolved to foster cooperation among human groups. And, you know, that's why we are reciprocal. So I just, you know, in writing this paper and coming up with this idea, I thought, okay, let's introduce this idea. Let's see what happens if we introduce this idea. And so here's the 2 results that I'm arguing for. First, argue that the evolutionary account of reciprocity helps deflect Van Weinsberg's arguments about deception. And second, it also reveals that reciprocity is a more complex phenomenon that is currently represented in the robotics literature. So as we'll get into the details, you know, the robotics literature just sort of talks about reciprocity with like you and me, I pay you back, you know, I do something for you, you do something for me. But as the picture that I'm going to show you, reciprocity is more complicated. There's direct and indirect reciprocity. And robotics researchers should take both into account. And yeah, direct and indirect, that won't make sense right now, but we'll get into the details. So that's my sort of 2-pronged thesis. Okay. So, all right. So people are maybe wondering, like, what am I talking about when I talk about Wrasse? Admitting someone to the room. So here's why I'm talking about Wrasse. Wrasse are a certain type of fish. So here's basically what I'm going to talk about now is basically the evolutionary theory part. So first I'm going to talk about direct reciprocity and then indirect reciprocity. So cooperation has long been a focus of study in evolutionary biology, already mentioned that. So theories of kin selection and direct reciprocity explain some of the forms of cooperation in the animal kingdom. So kin selection is you helping your family members, right? The people that share genes with you. And so that explains why, we help some people, we help the people that are related to us. And direct reciprocity explains some other relationships. So why do we cooperate with people who aren't related to us, but, are our friends? I mean, this is costly to do. So why do we cooperate with them? Well, one explanation is direct reciprocity, right? So if I help you now, then, you could help me in the future, and we sort of build a reciprocal relationship. And that is valuable, right? That helps us both survive, that helps us both thrive, and pass on our genes, etc. So that's a direct reciprocity from A to B, B to A, just kind of simple back and forth. Okay, but these two theories, they don't explain everything, right? So here's the little story about on the reef, about the fish on the reef. So certain species of wrasse, they're known to clean, and probably some of you have kind of heard about this. This is sort of famous in the evolutionary theory literature, but they clean the parasites off of reef fish, and it's an interesting relationship. The wrasse, they clean the bacteria and the parasites off of reef fish, and the reef fish sort of offer protection, and so there's kind of a directly reciprocal relationship between them. And however, further sort of observations of this found that instead of taking the time to find parasites in unhealthy tissue, some wrasse just cheat. They just, instead of taking the time, they just bite the reef fish, and they get a whole mouthful of healthy tissue, which is obviously, more valuable, has a lot more nutrients. But this causes a ruckus, right? The reef fish is not happy about this. And the reef fish usually chases the wrasse, and but here's the interesting finding. When this cheating behavior occurs. It doesn't occur very often, but it occurs sometimes. When this happens, other reef fish see it. They observe this conflict, and we don't know exactly what's going on, but they somehow track that this wrasse is a cheating wrasse, and they don't want to offer themselves up for clean from this wrasse. So basically, this wrasse has gained a reputation for cheating, and is less likely to be, other reef fish to engage in a reciprocal relationship with it. Okay, so here's an interesting phenomenon in the animal kingdom, and obviously, there's lots of examples of this. This is just sort of one of the more well-known and kind of fun ones. But direct reciprocity and kin selection, they don't explain this. So what's going on? So this is the theory of indirect reciprocity. So this kind of cooperation can emerge, sort of tracking, the reputation behavior, so long as players track individuals, track each other's reputation via an image score. So image score is sort of a technical term. It's not super important, but you can just think of it as, an individual's reputation, right? If it's positive and it goes up, then they have a good reputation for cooperation. If it goes down, they have a negative reputation for cooperation. So image scoring allows for a range of strategies for responding to the reputation of others. And this includes discriminating cooperation, right? So if you only cooperate with someone who has a positive image score, then you are more likely to sort of be cooperating with someone who is a cooperative individual, right? Who has a reputation as a cooperative individual. And sort of your image score is shaped by your behaviors. So if an individual is cooperative in interaction, their image score increases, their reputation to be a cooperative partner increases. And if they defect, like, the wrasse biting the reef fish, then their image score decreases, the reputation decreases, and people, individuals, animals, they're less likely to to cooperate with you, to engage in a relationship with you. And this makes sense. We probably, this hopefully sort of may ring some bells with your own experience in life, in social life. But so here's the idea, right? So monitoring the reputation of others and only cooperating with those who have good reputations for being cooperative individuals proves to be evolutionary advantageous. Okay, so that's the theory of indirect reciprocity. Hopefully that makes sense. This sort of reputation tracking. Okay, so here's the implications for the social robotics literature, so I argue. So I'm first going to be kind of deflecting Amy Van Weinsberg in the rest of this page here. Okay, so with this information, I want to say that another way of conceptualizing, we have another way of conceptualizing the value of reciprocity. So now we see that it's also instrumentally valuable, right? So it's a behavioral tool used to increase one's image score within a population. It originally evolved as an instrument to increase reproductive fitness. Since then, of course, we'll acknowledge that philosophical reflection, care ethics, this has enabled us to understand that reciprocity also has inherent value, right? Especially as it pertains to relational care. But what I'm saying here is that reciprocity has two kinds of value. It has instrumental value and it has inherent value. Instrumental from the evolutionary account and inherent value from the care ethics account. Okay, so with this in mind, I want to introduce, hopefully this doesn't confuse things, but I want to introduce a distinction that I think will be helpful in evolutionary theory. So approximate cause versus a distal cause. Approximate cause is that an event that is immediately responsible for some observed result, and a distal cause is the deeper cause for that observed result. So an example is, why do you care for your children, right? I mean, you care for your children. The approximate cause for you caring for your children is because you love your children, right? You have deep feelings for them. You care about their well-being. That's the proximate cause. And you have these sort of emotional causes, right? The distal cause, the deeper and evolutionary reason why you care for your children is because they share your genes. So there's sort of, so there's kind of two different explanations here. And this is I think, a helpful distinction in evolutionary theory. So hopefully this helps with my argument here. So with this distinction in mind, I'll keep it there so people can see. With this distinction in mind, I want to argue that the same kind of portrait can be sort of laid out for reciprocity in both humans and social robots. And this kind of backs Van Weinsberg's argument into a corner. So here's the idea, right? So humans, the distal reason for reciprocity is to increase our image scores, right? As the theory of indirect reciprocity has shown, or plausibly shown. The proximate reason for reciprocity, though, as care ethics has shown, is engage in relationships that respond to the needs and interests of others. And this is where care ethicists find inherent value. So there's, in humans, as I've already mentioned, right? There's both this inherent and instrumental value coming from these distal and proximate reasons. But here's the key here, right? In social robots, I want to say that the same story can be told. In this case, there is also both instrumental and inherent value, right? So the distal reason for reciprocity in social robots is to increase their social acceptability, right? So this is why programmers put this encode reciprocity into social robots, is that people will respond to them positively, they'll accept them socially, blah, 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 right? However, I want to also say that the proximate reason for reciprocity in robots is to engage in relationships that respond to the needs and interests of others. So this point that I'm on right here, this is probably the most controversial point that I make in the paper. I'm assuming that robots have needs and interests, and so this is kind of like the weakest point in the paper. So I'd be curious if anyone has any thoughts or suggestions or questions about this. But this is a controversial move to make. But yeah, so I'm assuming that robots need needs and interests. I think that they do. Peter Rielton has a recent account where he lays out this, and I sort of take his account into consideration, right? So, and I don't want to say anything like they have interests that are, morally important. I don't want to get into, that sort of complexity. I just want to say that they have basic interests. They have some kind of basic interests, like an animal has interests, like a raccoon or a salamander has interests, right? So some interests, they have, interest in having electrical power, updated software, interest in performing their duties well, successfully caring for the human. But again, this is controversial. I admit this. But yeah, so this is it, right? So this is the point that I'm trying to make, is that, yeah, the same story can be told for social robots and for humans. So this last point here is kind of the conclusion, right? So if Van Weinsberg wants to claim that human-robot reciprocal relationships are deceptive, the same story can be told for human reciprocal relationships. So she will also have to maintain that human-human reciprocal relationships are deceptive. And that's problematic, right? So that's the first that's the first argument, the first prong of my thesis. I think I'm running out of time, so hopefully I'll go through this second part. But basically, the second part is just saying, hey, that's great. Direct reciprocity is important, does seem to be important for human robot interactions, but also indirect reciprocity, right? It's basically what I'm saying. So yeah, okay. So reciprocity is more complex in humans. This is kind of repeating. Both direct and indirect reciprocity should be taken into account by robotics researchers. Okay, so that's kind of summarizing up to where we are now. Okay, so why should we care about indirect reciprocity as well? Well, I want to say that it is important for factors that are viewed as pivotal in social acceptance of robots, right? So perceived social presence, the amount to which a human feels that they are dealing with a social entity, perceived sociability, how much a human perceives that a robot is capable of social behavior, attitude, positive and negative feelings, and trust. So these are some of the factors discussed in the literature. And I want to argue that, again, I'm not saying that I'm on board with direct reciprocity, increasing these factors, right? But I'm saying also indirect reciprocity. If a social robot's capable of indirect reciprocity as well, then these factors further improve, right? And this is just something that people haven't discussed in literature, so I'm just kind of introducing it, right? So yeah, so I want to argue that a robot's ability to engage in indirectly reciprocal relation can improve social acceptance in all these ways. And then basically the last part of the paper is this long example of a care robot in a hospital. So, and it's basically 3 examples of how indirect, if a social robot is capable of indirect reciprocity, it can, encourage social acceptance of that robot, encourage the patient to view it as a social entity, social agent. I don't know if I want to use the word agent, but I think I do maybe use the word agent. But anyway, yeah. So the first part, first sort of mini example, the care robot's patient has a friend in the hospital. And when the friend is around, the patient's mood improves. She laughs more. She seems more optimistic. So if the robot is capable of indirect reciprocity, I want to argue that this will improve trust and attitude that the patient has toward the robot. The patient will appreciate that the robot understands some of her important relationships, and that the robot sort of has a more nuanced understanding of these social dynamics. And this will increase all 4, right? Trust, attitude, socially present, and sociable. And, as I talk about these examples, I encourage you this is how I think about it, at least. I try to put myself in the patient's shoes and think, okay, would this help me view it as a more social entity, or would it improve, social presence and sociability? And if you don't think that's the case, I'd be curious. Okay, so here's another example. There are 2 nurses that treat the patient differently. One nurse is caring and understanding. The other nurse is curt and neglectful. If the robot is capable of indirect reciprocity, it can recognize the difference in these interactions, right? And sort of respond to the difference. And I want to say that the patient will appreciate this. The They'll appreciate that the robot has complex understanding of the situation and is advocating on her behalf within the hospital. So this will increase trust, attitude, social presence, and sociability. So those are my two sort of key examples. This last one I'm a little unsure about. I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts, but so during a painful week, the patient is rude and abusive towards the care robot. So if it were the case that the robot were not capable of indirect reciprocity, then, you know, the robot would sort of resume normal reciprocal operations with the patient afterwards, right? So, you know, if the patient's rude and then later on, you know, does something nice for the robot or responds positively, then the robot kind of just continues on and they keep on with a directly reciprocal relationship. But I mean, like, if you think about if you were there, right? If this sort of robot didn't acknowledge that you were treating it rudely and abusing it, you're probably less likely to think of it as social, right? Less likely to accept it as a social entity, social agent, so something like that, right? So you're less likely to have lower perceived social presence and sociability. But if the social robot is capable of kind of tracking these behaviors, you know, and just, you know, kind of remembering them and recalling them and saying, okay, there was a rude behavior in the past. Let's acknowledge that, you know, like that was an uncooperative behavior. You know, I want to say that it'd be much more likely that the patient will see the robot as a social agent. Again, I'm not quite sure about this example because it's a little bit confusing, because it kind of seems like maybe it's a directly reciprocal relationship and maybe indirect reciprocity isn't important. I mean, I think it's important insofar as they're tracking sort of the cooperative behaviors and holding on to those behaviors. But yeah, I'm a little unsure. But okay, great. So that's it, right? So I'm just basically saying, yeah, let's also think about indirect reciprocity, and it will also likely improve relations. And I'm curious if you have other, you know, potentially better examples of this. And that's it. Thank you for your time. I'll stop sharing my screen, I guess.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. Do people have questions for Michael? I know Kelly asked you if you could possibly email her a copy of your handout. I very much appreciate a copy of your handout.
Oh, really? Okay, great.
You had some really interesting points, and
okay.
And honestly, a lot of points that I haven't really seen made in the same way. So,
oh, great. Yeah, that's good to hear.
Thank you. It's really, really nice work. Really nice work. Yeah, there's always questions, it seems like, about, you know, how you should program things to interact with people and what the best methods are. And I hadn't really heard people directly address the concept of reciprocity before. So that's really, I think, really valuable. Or it's a, you know, I view it as a significant contribution. It's good. Thank you.
Yeah. That's sort of that's a great way of saying what I'm doing is, you know, how the overall question they're approaching is how should social robots interact with people? And yeah, there's a huge literature right here. It's exciting time.
Right. Great. Questions? If you have a question, you can unmute and just.
I see we have one question. Yeah.
Sorry, I was raising my hand, but I didn't. Holding.
Oh, there it is. I see it. I'm sorry. It kind of blended into your background. I apologize.
No, that's all right. Yeah, first of all, thank you for this presentation. It was very interesting to me because I am. Yesterday, I presented a paper about friendship with AI companions, and I actually, in my paper, I refer to I don't know how to correctly pronounce her last name, Winsberg. Weinsberg. So I refer to her paper, and I'm kind of sympathetic to her views about social robots and for the elderly care. And okay, so I'm not sure if my questions are directly relevant to what you're trying to do in the paper, but I really think that the ideas that you presented are quite valuable. So at some point, you were you said that you are talking about like a basic notion of needs and interests that these robots can have, and I was thinking about before you said that, okay, that I'm not really looking at if they have morally relevant interests or needs. I was just thinking about that because I feel like it's kind of relevant in this context to ask whether these robots or any AI system can have morally relevant interests, and what it would take for them to have these morally relevant interests, and how would that affect our treatment of them and our interaction with them, that kind of thing. So yeah, so this is so the literature about moral patiency. So you said one of the cases that you gave as an example at the end was, for example, whether the robot is capable of not pursuing reciprocal kind of interaction after getting treated in a bad way, or receiving a kind of frustrated response from the user or something like that. So in that context, especially, I thought that maybe that capacity of maybe we should talk about whether that capacity to not pursue those reciprocal kind of reaction is genuine or real or not. And I feel like this ties to the moral status of the robot, that I thought that it was relevant. And yeah, another thing is that, and this again, I might be missing your point here, and I really like your examples about the evolutionary story of humans and how you try to apply to the case of the robots. But I was just thinking, so in this context, what does it matter if these robots have any evolutionary story, or if it does, what kind of evolutionary story would they have? Yeah, and the last thing that I want to say is, again, I think that your understanding of your kind of examination of reciprocity was really interesting, and I was just thinking maybe if you could think about evolutionary accounts or stories for other kind of relationships that we make with robots, such as, for example, trust, how trust evolved throughout humans, and that kind of thing. And yeah, and at some point you said that animals have these kind of basic interests, for example, and I'm just taking these robots having these basic interests, and I feel like you need to make a distinction there, because I think non-human animals have basic moral patiency, so we don't really treat them in the bad way for a reason. So yeah, those are my comments. Sorry if I talk too much. Thank you so much.
That's great. Very helpful. Okay, I will try to address your points. Okay, great. Yeah, that's really interesting. So morally relevant interests, right? So yeah, so yeah, I guess in my paper, this is a huge controversial topic, right? So I try to stay out of this in my paper. But you're right, it's important. So I guess here are my thoughts on this. So I don't want to say that yeah, I don't want to say that, social robots have the needs and interests that are complex, to the level of complexity that they are a moral agent like a human is a moral agent, right? So they're not a moral peer to a human. I think that would be way too controversial and would require argument. I mean, maybe that's true, right? But as far as my account here, I don't want to say that. So I want to put the needs and interests of the social robot on more sort of less complex animals, right? Like a salamander or a raccoon. But you're right? So like these animals, there's a good argument that these animals should be treated as moral patients. So not necessarily moral agents, right? But they deserve some moral respect. And I'm fine with that. Like I would agree with that. That's, to the extent that, I mean, I guess it depends on how you want to define moral agency, but like to the extent that they have equally complex emotional and cognitive capacities as some non-human animal, then they should be entitled the same moral respect as an animal. But I wouldn't want to say that they're entitled the same moral respect as another human. Again, this requires a whole lot of other argument, right? About like what is moral agency. But yeah, that's kind of what I want to, probably where I want to come down on with that line. So, okay. And okay, so then you talk about the painful week while the patient is abusive towards the robot. And okay, this is interesting. So you point out that okay, so the robot, tracks that the patient has abused them, and then kind of, I don't know what the robot does, maybe demand, like ask for an apology, but somehow acknowledges what happened, and tracks what happened. And you're making the point that is potentially not genuine, right? And that the robot has just been sort of programmed to do this, right? So, but let me ask you a question. So that's true. You're right. So the robot has been programmed to track the behaviors of this patient, let's say, and if certain behavior, if this patient has certain negative behaviors, then maybe ask for an apology or maybe discuss it with the patient. That's true, but how is that different than what we humans do, right? So like if you want to accept the evolutionary picture that we engage in, these reciprocal relationships where when your friend insults you or something like that, you don't just respond to them normally. You say, hey, that was nice, let's talk about this, can you apologize, etc. So I don't know if we're both, you could say like, okay, maybe evolution programmed us to sort of have that kind of social relationship, whereas the robot designers programmed them to like sort of respond to them in a social way, right? I mean, like, so is there really a difference in how genuine the interaction is, do you think? And this is kind of a controversial like question I'm putting to you, but I'm just curious on your thoughts.
Okay, so I suspect that there's a difference because, okay, so I think you were kind of trying to get to that problem of other minds issue. Like when we're interacting with other humans, we don't have access to, privileged access in philosophers' terms to their mental state. So, but we have good evidence that they have mental states like ours. So I was just, okay, so I'm coming from a philosophy of mind background, and that's why I'm asking these questions. So, and I think it matters that if the reciprocity is coming from an entity who is capable of this kind of complex, sophisticated kind of intentionality, mental states with a certain type of intentionality, which I try to argue in my dissertation, by the way, that would give some future hypothetical AI systems this basic moral patiency. And I think it's important, as you did, that to make the distinction between moral patiency and agency. I think some people argue that if an entity has moral patiency, they have agency, and vice versa, but I'm not too sure about that. I think moral patiency probably requires less than moral agency, but I think it's still the basic moral patiency still requires to have this capacity to have a certain type of complex intentionality that I don't want to go into details here because it's too much philosophy of mind. But yeah, I think it would matter if the reciprocity or the action is coming from an entity with basic moral status, with basic moral patiency, then not. For example, when you're interacting with your dog, let's say, we all accept that dogs are moral patients, right? We don't kick them, we don't treat them badly, we feed them if we are good people. So in the case of the robot, I mean, we see that they can be kicked around and nobody cares most of the times. So yeah, that's why I thought it was important.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, I think that's a great response. And okay, so the idea would be it's different it's a different kind of interaction. It's not as genuine because the social robot is not capable of doesn't have these complex cognitive capacities. It's not capable of these sort of complex intentionality, and that's, I agree. I mean, like that seems right to me, and I will totally accept that, right? Like I'll take that point, and so I guess I would say, you know, so maybe your response is a good way for Amy to respond to my argument, right? You know, like if, you know, so I'm addressing her particular points about deception, right? And I'm saying, okay, well, if you think that this is a deceptive relationship, then the same kind of values can be found in, you know, human-robot interaction. Maybe something that she could say is along your lines, right? Okay, well, fine, maybe, Michael, you know, buy your argument there, but still there's not complex intentionality. There's still this other level, and maybe that's a reason for deception to occur. That's true. And I guess I don't know how I'd respond to that right now. I mean, I'd have to think about if the evolutionary account could respond to that. Maybe not, maybe that's right. You know, maybe that is problematic and that leads to deception. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think there's, I mean, I really think that there's a lot of merit to your argument here. So there are evolutionary accounts of intentionality. For example, we could maybe take a look at, I mean, I'm sure you might have looked at them, but yeah, I think you can look at them. I think that evolutionary approach has a lot of merits.
Yeah, that would be interesting, right? If so, I don't know about this, but maybe there's evolutionary accounts of intentionality that, again, make it so the types of values in question are equal, or, you know, somehow they balance out, so there's not as much. So you can't really argue that there's deception in one place. But yeah, I don't know enough about it. But yeah, that would be an interesting discussion. And yeah, that would be. I haven't read any. Well, I'm not. I wouldn't say that I'm like an expert in the literature, but I haven't read any papers specifically about intentionality for these kinds of social robots. That would be a cool thing to explore, I think, in general. So yeah, thanks for your questions. I hope I somewhat answered them.
Thank you.